Ever stop and think about what makes your smartphone screen look so, well, vibrant? Or maybe what gives an electric car that instant acceleration?
Or even guides, some really advanced defense tech.
Exactly. It often comes down to a group of elements called rare earths. And they play this huge, huge role in our lives, even if we don't, see them directly.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how indispensable they've become, these materials that sort of work behind the scenes. And as we all push towards greener energy and smarter tech, our reliance on them, it's just going to grow. What are rare earth elements? Fundamentally, we're looking at a set of 17 chemical elements on the periodic table.
17. Okay.
Yeah. And like we just mentioned, they generally get split into two main groups: light rare earth elements, LREs, and heavy rare earth elements, HREs.
So what's the real difference there? It's got to be more than just like their weight on a scale, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, atomic weight is the basic difference, yes. But that difference has big knock-on effects. It influences their chemical properties, how they behave.
And where you find them.
Exactly. Where they're found geologically and, crucially, their economic value. So LREs tend to be, relatively speaking, more abundant in the Earth's crust.
Okay. More common?
Yeah, easier to access, generally found in higher concentrations. So they often end up in more widespread consumer things, industrial uses. HREs, on the other hand, they're rarer, often found mixed in with the LREs, but in much lower concentrations. So getting them out, separating them, it's tougher, more expensive.
And that rarity, that difficulty, must make them more valuable.
Precisely. Because they are scarcer and they have these really unique properties, HREs usually fetch a higher price. They're absolutely vital for some very specialized high-tech applications.
Like what?
Think high-performance green tech, definitely defense and aerospace. Their atomic structures also mean they can make incredibly powerful magnets that work even at really high temperatures. That's critical for things like jet engines or guided missiles. Think of LREs as your essential everyday workhorses, the lumber and concrete, used everywhere. HREs are more like that titanium. Rarer, trickier to handle, maybe more expensive, but absolutely essential for those specific, really demanding jobs where nothing else will do.
Okay, that makes sense. So we have these two groups, light and heavy. Why all the buzz? Where are we actually using these elements day to day?
Well, the list of applications is just huge, and that's really why there's so much focus on them. They're the hidden engine behind so much of our modern world.
Right. Give us some examples.
Okay, electric vehicles, big one. Many EV motors need powerful magnets made with neodymium,
And neodymium is?
a light rare earth element, an LRE. Same goes for wind turbines, those giant blades turning. They often rely on powerful REE magnets inside the generator to make electricity efficiently.
So the whole global shift towards clean energy electric transport, it's fundamentally tied to our supply of these elements.
Absolutely, and it doesn't stop there. Your smartphone, right, the laptop you might be using, packed with various REs.
Where?
In the screen, phosphors that make the colors bright, in the tiny powerful speakers, in the vibration motors, even in the polishing process for the glass.
Wow.
Clean energy beyond wind, too. Some types of solar panels use them. Advanced manufacturing, even things related to AI, can utilize their unique properties.
It really is across the board. Aerospace,
Yeah,
telecommunications, I assume they're big users too.
definitely. High-performance alloys, fiber optics, and as we touched on, defense is a major one.
Right, the HREs for high-temp magnets and lasers.
Exactly. Guided missiles, jet engines, sonar systems, advanced communications. Many critical military technologies depend heavily on HREs. You also find them in things like high-speed electric trains, some advanced battery types, even in nuclear reactor control rods.
So the basic takeaway is, if it generates power, uses power, stores it, controls it, there's a really good chance rare earths are in there somewhere
Yeah,
because of those magnetic, optical, conductive properties.
that's pretty much it, yeah. Their unique electronic structures make them incredibly useful for manipulating energy and light in ways other elements can't.
Okay, now you hear rare earth mining and you kind of picture, digging for gold or silver. But you mentioned that data suggests it's different.
It is often quite different, yeah. That's a common misconception. While there are dedicated rare earth mines, it's actually more typical for REEs to be recovered as like a secondary product.
A byproduct.
Exactly. A byproduct when companies are mining and processing other things entirely, like iron ore or aluminum from bauxite or even phosphate for fertilizers.
Why is that? Why aren't there more dedicated RE mines?
It often comes down to economics and geology. Rare earths are actually not that rare in terms of overall crustal abundance. Some are more common than lead or silver, but they're very dispersed,
Spread out.
very spread out. They rarely occur in those rich, concentrated veins like gold. Finding a deposit where the REEs alone are valuable enough to justify the massive cost of setting up a dedicated mine and processing plant. It's challenging.
So mining for iron ore, say, is the main goal, and the Aryoshis just happen to be mixed in.
Precisely. They end up in the leftover material, the waste streams, what miners call tailings or slags. And interestingly, there's a growing trend, both economically and environmentally driven, to actually go back and reprocess old mining waste, specifically to extract the rare earths that were discarded years ago.
That sounds smarter. More sustainable, maybe.
It can be.
Right.
Less new digging, potentially. Now, geographically, there's another interesting aspect in the data. While you find RE deposits globally, certain types of deposits are more common in specific climates.
Okay.
Those ion adsorption clays we mentioned earlier, the ones particularly rich in the valuable heavy rare earths, the HREs, and also relatively easier to extract from.
Yeah.
They tend to form through intense rock weathering, which happens more readily in humid tropical climates. Think southern China, Southeast Asia, parts of Brazil. The REs basically stick loosely to the clay particles.
Easier to wash off, kind of.
Sort of, yeah. Simpler chemical leaching can often get them out. Contract that with the hard rock deposits you find more often in, say, North America, Australia, or Scandinavia. There, the REEs are locked tightly inside complex mineral crystals, which means much more complex, energy-intensive, and expensive processing. Crushing, grinding, complex chemical baths. It's a whole different ballgame.
So it sounds like finding them is one thing, but getting them out and separated, that's a huge hurdle.
That is absolutely critical. The data points very clearly to this. The main bottleneck, the real challenge in the global rare earth supply chain right now, isn't necessarily finding deposits or digging them up, it's the processing. Separating those 17 chemically similar elements from each other, refining them to the high purity levels needed for tech applications, that's incredibly difficult and costly.
And who controls that processing capability?
Well, that leads us straight into the economics and the geopolitics. The data shows China currently dominates this processing stage. Hugely.
Right. I've seen figures like 85%, maybe even more, of global refining capacity.
That's the ballpark, yes. Which is significantly higher than their share of actual mining, which is also substantial, but maybe more like 60, 70%. This dominance in processing gives them immense leverage.
Leverage. Okay, let's unpack that. I've heard people call rare earths the new oil.
Yeah.
Is that a fair comparison based on the data?
It's an increasingly common comparison, and in many ways, yes, the data supports it. Think about oil in the 20th century. It fueled industrial growth, transportation, geopolitics.
Absolutely.
The argument now is that REEs are becoming similarly fundamental for the 21st century's key technologies, especially as we try to move away from fossil fuels. The EVs, the wind turbines, the smart grids, they all lean heavily on REEs. Our modern electricity-based economy just wouldn't work the same way without them.
So just like with oil, it's not just about having the stuff in the ground. Control matters.
Exactly. Control over the whole value chain. Extraction, yes, but crucially, the refining, the supply lines, the technology to use them effectively. And right now, as we said, China holds a very strong hand, particularly in that refining piece.
How did they get there? How did China build up such a dominant position? Was it just finding those rich clay deposits?
That was part of it, certainly. Having significant natural deposits, especially those HRE-rich clays, was a big advantage. They were often cheaper to mine and initially process, but it was much more than geological luck.
Okay.
The data points to decades of strategic government policy. Huge investments were made, often heavily subsidized, specifically to build up a world-leading refining and processing industry. They strategically linked rare earth production to their own booming domestic tech manufacturing, electronics, EVs, wind power. They ensured their own industries had access, sometimes using export quotas or taxes that made REEs more expensive for competitors outside China.
Controlling the supply and the price.
And they didn't just focus domestically. Chinese companies, often state-backed, have also been actively acquiring mining assets and partnerships overseas, including through initiatives like the Belt and Road, to secure raw material flows back to their refineries.
And this dominant position, it's had real-world geopolitical effects, hasn't it? I remember hearing about export restrictions.
Yes, there have been instances where China adjusted export quotas or imposed controls, sometimes linked to trade disputes or political tensions. This definitely served as a wake-up call globally.
Wake-up call for.
For many other industrialized nations, the U.S., countries in the EU, Japan, Australia, They suddenly realized how dependent they'd become on a single source for these absolutely critical materials, materials vital not just for consumer tech, but for their economies and their military
So now
capabilities.
they're trying to catch up, build their own supply chains.
Exactly. There's a major push now, you see it in government strategies and investments worldwide, to identify and develop domestic or allied sources of REEs, build new processing facilities outside China, create strategic stockpiles, and form partnerships to diversify supply. It's seen as a matter of economic and national security.
It really paints a picture of a market that's, well, strategically charged, doesn't it? Which brings us to the future. What might happen next? I've seen some discussion, some data pointing towards the idea of maybe a commodity exchange for rare earths, like we have for oil or gold.
That's a fascinating possibility, and yes, it's being actively discussed. Right now, the REE market is quite opaque compared to major commodities.
So,
Well, mostly it works through direct, often private deals between suppliers and buyers, spot market transactions, and because China controls so much of the processed supply, they have a huge say in setting the prices and determining who gets what when.
so no central marketplace, no futures contracts to hedge prices easily.
Not in a widespread, globally accepted way, no. The LME has looked into adding some key REs, like neodymium and praseodymium, but it hasn't fully materialized yet. There are price reporting agencies like Metal Bulletin or Benchmark Mineral Intelligence that track transaction data and publish indices.
But that's not the same as an actual exchange platform.
Exactly. It provides price visibility, but doesn't function as a trading hub.
Now, given China's position and its partnerships within the BRICS group, Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, could we see an alternative exchange emerge from there? The data suggests some of those countries have significant reserves, too.
That is definitely a scenario analysts are considering. China is the dominant player, yes. But Brazil has very large reserves, Russia too. India and South Africa have growing industrial ambitions and potential deposits.
So the BRICS nations together have a lot of clout in the world.
Potentially, yes. And there's a stated interest among BRICS nations in creating alternative financial and economic structures, ones not dominated by the West. Establishing a BRICS-backed commodity exchange for critical minerals like rare earths could fit neatly into that agenda.
What would be the advantage for them? Why set up their own exchange?
While several potential benefits, it could give them collectively much greater control over pricing mechanisms. Instead of just reacting to prices heavily influenced by Chinese domestic policy or Western indices, they could potentially set benchmarks that better reflect their production costs or strategic goals.
Protecting their own industries, maybe? Ensuring supply?
Precisely. It could help ensure strategic access for their own manufacturers, offer an alternative trading venue that might be more aligned with their interests, and generally enhance their collective geopolitical influence in this critical sector.
Does China have anything like this already, just domestically?
Yes, China does have domestic trading platforms like the Baotu Rare Earth Products Exchange. It's conceivable that such existing infrastructure could potentially be expanded or used as a model for a larger, perhaps BRICS-focused international exchange. It could shift the dynamic from them being primarily suppliers reacting to market conditions to becoming more active shapers of the global market.
Just to wrap up, let's quickly recap the key takeaways from the data we've looked at.
Sure. I think the main points are: one, rare earth elements are absolutely essential for a huge amount of modern tech, especially green energy and electronics. You can't really escape them.
Right, indispensable.
Two, getting them isn't just simple mining. The data shows processing and separation is the really complex, critical bottleneck. Three, China currently dominates that processing stage, giving it significant influence based on historical investment and geological factors.
Where
And four, the whole landscape is shifting. Other countries are scrambling to build their own supply chains, and there's this potential evolution towards maybe a more formal commodity market structure, possibly even one influenced by the BRICS group.
back to where we started, that smooth phone screen, that EV acceleration, you can now see how tangled up it all is with this complex global supply chain, currently shaped so much by one nation's strategic position.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question to mull over, doesn't it? As demand for these elements just keeps soaring, who is ultimately going to control the flow? And what will the long-term impacts be for technology, for economies, and for the balance of global power itself?